I was an early employee at Squire Technologies from its inception to late Series D.
You mentioning that brings a lot of credibility given this is a back office product.
51% of Americans are going to be freelance by 2027.
I don't know if you're going to be able to solve it.
We can put men on the moon, but we can't fix this.
That is important to say, or else you will get bucketed in an investor's head into a business that you are not.
What's your name?
Ian,
you're going to have a minute to pitch here. Tell us what you're building, and then you're going to get some feedback. Are you ready?
Yeah.
What are you building?
I'm Ian, co-founder and CEO of Greenlit. We're building Greenlit, an AI-enabled back office solution for the media and entertainment industry. We streamline the business of filmmaking, everything from project management, compliance, finance, and legal. When making a film or a TV show, each individual project is its own business, and there's tons of administrative workflows that need to get done in order to get into production. These are extremely fragmented, expensive, and slow, and they're typically done on extremely archaic processes and softwares. Greenlit enables companies to collaborate, manage, fund, and execute on their projects by cutting the cost and time to get into production, giving them one central platform. While we were in closed beta, we generated $7,000 in ARR, and now we're in talks with a top 5 production companies, an A-list actor production company, and talent agencies while we continue to scale and expand.
That's about a minute. Good job. Hang on to that mic. I just want to give you a quick piece of feedback because I don't want to forget it later. And this is feedback for a lot of founders and even, again, job seekers. That's going to be my theme apparently today is matching the two. Be careful around small numbers that don't do exactly what you're trying to do. So 7,000 ARR during a beta period is actually a compelling proof point maybe when someone's in due diligence with you to understand what have you done so far, to see that you're action-oriented. So it's a number that I'm not saying remove from all of your materials, but in an earlier version of the pitch, it's so small that it didn't do anything for me, cognitively, other than say, oh, that's a small number. And so better to say during the beta period, I would even prefer you to use non-numerical dollar amounts and say, we got 3 customers to do X, Y, Z behavior. And even that is a more compelling story. So just think about, the scale of the number, is it impactful enough?
Yeah, I mean, on that point, one thing that investors think about when it's quite early, and that's obviously where I spend all my time, is there's some element of quality of customer matters in some cases more than the ARR itself. And so the extent to which you can kind of accentuate that bit, that's helpful. And also customer love to me matters a lot more than ARR as well. Because, if you're well networked, perhaps you can get some kind of money in the door, at least a little bit, to kind of get the business started. And again, it's definitely better than nothing than the alternative. But having, some kind of, indications of, we can't live without this. It's hard in a minute pitch, but I think in general, to me, is more powerful than maybe a specific number in this case.
What did you think of the pitch in general?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I, immediately, was thinking through is what is the future of media and entertainment, and what does it look like, and how do you fit in that future? One important framework that I think through from an investing perspective is what is the inflection? Inflections are the waves that founders ride on. They can be belief inflections, regulatory, technological, adoption. You think about Uber and Lyft, so you needed the GPS locator to be able to call a car where you're at. Okta needed the cloud. You think about a number of different companies. We were talking about some inflections for Figma that allowed for more collaboration in the browser. And so the thing that I'm thinking through is this is an industry in the midst of change, and I think change in a lot of ways is really good for a founder. And so what about that change are you kind of riding on? Obviously, there's the technical AI back office piece. But that was the first question that I had is what is happening to this industry? How and what future do you see?
Yeah, no, great question. And it definitely rides on the technical, the AI, which enabling and decreasing the cost of production, which is increasing the more independent, mid-size SMB market that have the power and the opportunity to kind of leapfrog some of the incumbent companies and studios that are putting out some of the same old content that we're tired of seeing from remakes and reboots.
So to kind of double click into that, the insight there is that there's going like this longer tail of kind of content generators is going to increase, and maybe there's going to be forums like this, and content is changing. And so in that way, right now they don't have their stack that's appropriate for them. Whereas maybe some of the big players you will be able to engage with them, and that's great. But you're kind of the tailwind that you're riding is a lot of it's happening on our phone. The people who are kind of developing some of that content are just different. And so am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, even a show like this, right?
Yeah.
There's back office solution, contracting, management, kind of handling cast, crew, everything in between to kind of the logistical parts to get it into, production and get the footage in the can.
So I would, my feedback there is I would, talk about that change, because obviously you have the technical bit, AI is a change event,
Mhm.
but I think kind of double clicking into, hey, media is changing, and here we're here to play an important role for a different type of customer, and we can still serve the kind of elephants in the room too, but like at the same time, there's like this longer tail of customer that doesn't have a stack for them. I think it's another thing for folks to kind of hang their hat on, such that, okay, there's a lot of change happening here, and you understand some of those changes that are occurring, which you clearly do.
I want to plus one. This is like exactly the feedback I'd have. And I'll give you a different startup that pitched on the feedback loop a couple months ago in this space that I had the same sort of conversation with. As an example, it was Shotlist AI. And what they're doing is they're doing shot lists. For those who don't know, common in the media spaces, I've come to learn about it. There's the list of all the shots, and there are lots of shots that you do. It's all the angles, all the cameras. There's facing me right now is Mike close, Leeor is close, our 2-shot. There's a wide shot. This is, by the way, a static stage show versus, if you're doing a narrative, you've got a lot of cameras moving during either a scene or as scene switch. And so the shot list AI concept, as they pitched it on stage, was, hey, we're going to use AI to generate these shot lists. And by the way, the thing that we're going to provide is we know how these should be built, and we have all this data, and that's why our shot list AI will be awesome. And over time, the way I'd challenge them in a similar fashion, as I said, how won't you be deprecated when OpenAI's models get better? They'll be good at writing, and they'll do the shot list without your tweaks and your fine tunes in your app. And the thing we eventually got to, and the thing I talked to one of the founders afterwards as a co-founding couple, more of their story was more of the same interaction you have, which is one of the things that are changing about the world and won't change. And the thing about Shotlist that they didn't really get to on stage because they were overemphasizing the creative and not the workflow was, as everything else changes, there's a creative who wants to be empowered. And so creating shots is not necessarily net rewarding. For certain, when you're directing, I'm assuming it is really rewarding when you're in the room holding the camera. But when they're creating the shot list, it's so that the rest of the team gets a binder full of that shot list, and it has examples, and it has examples, not the word I'm looking for, but it's like storyboarded in a way, whatever else it is. And the whole idea of shot list is not to necessarily be better at the language of the shot list, but the process of the shot list, enabling the person to be more creative and enabling that team to do something different. And again, that story was so much more compelling to me because I go, okay, even if all they're doing is every time OpenAI updates or Anthropic updates their models, they're swapping out the model, that's not the point. The point is, how is it integrated with the teams that might be changing but still exist? The creatives who might be fighting tailwinds of AI-generated video, but will be fighting maybe those tailwinds by using AI-generated video. And so when they got away from saying, we're just using AI, and said, here's what's happening, and here's how our product is going to help people over time in this transition that this industry is going on. And again, I think you have the same thing that you should latch onto in that interaction you two had. And that brings me to questions. That's my feedback broadly, and I think spot on. Again, as someone who's hosting the show, and I'm involved, kind of end to end with my great team on both, kind of production, post-production, and what we do. I'm curious. I can imagine some of this stuff. We do it very informally. We probably don't do a lot of things that we should in the order and with the processes we should. But there are a lot of them I can imagine other AI tools also handling. In other words, as workflow tools and AI automation comes, some tools will be generalist tools and some will be verticalized tools. Right. And in this case, I want you to tell me more about the verticalized version, because the thing I'm saying in my head is, oh, the generalist tools will be good enough, but you're going to tell me I'm wrong. Tell me how I'm wrong. How are media companies not going to want to use the generic AI automation back office? They'll want the media version.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of just small minute things that are specific to film and TV. So for instance, tax incentives and being able to apply and get funding from the state or the country that you're filming in, and being able to streamline that process while also staying compliant and understanding that you have all your ducks and checks in a row, and then just being able to build like vertical agentic processes that are bespoke to the film back and forth, the contract negotiation, the waterfall setup, which, making sure that it's like our verticalized nature of a cap table, right? Who gets paid how much and in what order, right? And being able to then have the nuances that are kind of hidden within the contracts, but, through the platform, you're able to actually bring those out up front and center that a traditional LMM might not be able to catch.
What's your background? How'd you come to this?
So I was an early employee at Squire Technologies from its inception to late Series D, but actor, stuntman, and producer. So I cut my teeth on the scenes and acting scene in New York.
Literally sometimes.
Yeah.
I love it.
And then a little bit, doesn't need to be a long, the version of the story, like the origin of this particular moment. So obviously you have the experience and you have like the technology and the media experience, but I want to hear a little bit of the synthesis moment where you go, this is what I need to build.
Yeah. So I got booked on set. I was broke doing Uber Eats, and I was excited that I was getting paid more to do, an acting gig. And then it took me 4 weeks to get my paycheck. And I said, why is there not a way I can get paid instantly? Why am I still filling out paperwork when I'm coming to set, right? I was already disrupting a very pen and paper industry in the barbershop. And I realized film and media specifically was very archaic and dinosaur in their nature and their workflows. And that was kind of the impetus of like starting Greenlit.
There are a couple of reasons I asked these questions. I want to mention a couple things. First, did you mention Squire in your pitch, by the way?
I did not, no.
You should. For those who don't know, this is one of these. There are a couple in this category of like revolutionizing SMB and smaller e-commerce over the past, or commerce generally over the past 5 to 8 years, and this one in the barbershop space. And what are the other two that like canonically I'm like blanking?
There's like Service Titan,
and then but this is like where you take the SMB model, and again these folks couldn't just traditionally purchase like a restaurant's point of sale version. It's point of sale
Toast,
booking Toast, yeah, exactly. And so it's fascinating. I think you mentioning that brings a lot of credibility, given this is a back office product. So like you brought that so late in the game. The other reason I asked that question is, you keep going to these same stories when we ask you the question of like the tax benefits and then the cap table of media, which is super complicated for anyone, like an executive producer versus the publisher. And you're not telling any of that story in your pitch. And again, going to Leeor's other point of like, who is the hero here? And you're going, media is changing. Mm-hmm. And whether it's the actor who wants to get paid in a small set, but they want to support that small creator, but they, like that creator does not have the budget to do this all right. Why? It's not because it's actually that expensive. And in fact, I'll say that. I learned how to use all this equipment. These freelancers are people who they'll tell you I hire them myself and I understand this stuff. The hard stuff is in the creative itself, people putting their hands on stuff. And then the complicated back office, I get to skip that part because this isn't a media company. We don't have producers. So I get to skip this stuff. When you tell that story, especially to technologists who don't have to deal with it, and you go, you don't realize all the stuff that prevents someone from creating good art. And again, as a startup, I got to skip it all. Yeah. So I understand it a little bit. You got to tell that hero journey where creators are changing. And the ones that will survive in a generation of video coming out of AI products that are going to be on all of our feeds, they will be the ones to do it with cost in mind, automation supporting them, not only supporting them, but helping them pay the rest of the humans and people who will be involved, maybe even integrating the AI tools in a way that makes sense too, but getting the task credits, getting all of their back order and the back office in a row. And you telling that hero story is so much more of this, again, the transition moment, riding the wave, than simply being a picks and shovels company at a moment in time.
Yeah, my quick add to that is my dumb investor framework for assessing ideas, like very, very briefly, is it a hair on fire problem? Does it increase revenue or does it decrease cost? In that order, ideally 1 and 2. And there's components here, like for example, from the tax incentives perspective, where you could imagine, if you're a production company, you want to make sure you get paid as much money as possible. And so there's a reason as to why this is a problem that increases revenue, and perhaps like they're not compliant. And so there's kind of some piece on the kind of hair on fire problem perspective where there might, they might be exposing themselves. And so kind of articulating that in the pitch, I think is also important to make sure that like people understand the magnitude of the idea and understand the specificity of the idea to the problem.
Yeah. And again, to the Squire point and to this, you've got a lot of assets here. And I know you're a little nervous. It seems like getting on stage because you answer our questions better than your pitch.
Yeah.
And I think that's my call to action to you is think about all the stories and the ways in which you answered better afterwards. You got to bring that and get the practice in and understand what are all the details I'm hiding. Why am I hiding them? What insecurities force me to give a pitch that I'm going to be honest now that we found a good product together that I'm excited about. The pitch did not give me that, right? I was like, okay, I get it. Another AI automation tool that's verticalized, but not in a way that got me excited until I heard that hero story and your story. Again, Squire and you being an actor and a stuntman and this stuff, it all comes together. So really use the 13 minutes we did afterwards to now change that first minute. Yeah. But thanks for sharing.
Awesome.
Good job.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Shall we welcome the next founder stage? The round of applause. All right, what's your name?
My name's Tim Struby.
Tim, you're going to have a minute to tell us what you're building and get some feedback.
No problem.
You ready?
Yes.
What are you building?
toTree is the first ever furniture shopping service. So why furniture? Because it's a terrible process. Too many brands, too many options, not enough guidance. So what we've done is create a service that combines just the right amount of interior design expertise with a fast and easy process. So you go to our site, you answer some questions about your budget, your needs, your tastes, and our experts will find you the right furniture. And other benefits include you have your own specialist, we handle returns exchanges, we have flat rate shipping. Our business model is we charge a $149 service fee, plus we get anywhere from 5 to 30% off from the entire furniture order.
Under a minute. All right.
We'll work on it.
What compelled you to work on this idea, and what do you think the why now moment is for the furniture industry?
I think it's been there's been an incredible lack of innovation. It's really a fragmented industry, and there were certain factors that prompted this idea. Obviously, the work from home from the pandemic. We're targeting guys, so mid-century monitors become sort of mainstream, so we're able to really kind of capture and focus on that sort of demographic and that look. And again, there was just opportunity. When I started researching this, for 5 months, every day I looked for a reason not to do it, and I couldn't find one. I didn't want to do it. I didn't have any background in this. So I just figured it was a problem that could be solved, a big problem, but a solvable one.
Yeah. My initial reaction to that answer is when problems could be solved, and then when there is a practical response, the question in my head is why hasn't there been a venture-backed business to have built this just yet? And so that's kind of where the why now comes in, because I think naturally there is a lot of inertia until there are these kind of change events that we've been talking about, and so that's kind of, I think there is a piece that's missing here, that maybe buying patterns are changing, or maybe there might be, or the other option is kind of reasoning by understanding what didn't work in the past and what they were missing. That's another option. But I think to me, when I hear someone who's this is a plausibly good idea, to me, I hear good business and it will make money and it might even have a decent exit, but it doesn't feel venture backable to me. And not because it isn't, but just because it was articulated as such.
Right. I mean, it's, there's obviously models for this in different spaces, in clothing, cosmetics, et cetera, et cetera. In furniture, there are e-design companies, but they are, they're primarily targeted towards women. What we have, the technology now exists with the AI, which we're implementing now, that will really, really accelerate the process and hone the process. And we also have another tech feature. I hate to not be able to tell you about it, but it's...
you should. Get your ideas out there. I encourage you. Don't worry.
We just filed a provisional patent application.
Fantastic. So now you can... It's protected. What is it?
Basically, when I moved into my place in Brooklyn, my sofa didn't fit in the front door, which I had. And I was like, we can put men on the moon, but we can't fix this. So I just set my mind to it, and we just filed a patent where you're going to be able to take a video of your furniture path, scan a piece of furniture, and we run computer modeling to ensure that it fits. And that's
most
global.
By the way, I've never had this happen, so it's still a story I've not seen.
The self-adopted.
They actually come in and then put it back together.
They will.
It's crazy to me.
Yes.
I still want to see that happen. Branch. Branch? Is it Branch? Branch? No?
Branch?
Branch?
My name?
No.
No.
No, your name was Tim, right?
Yes.
Branch. Branch, furniture for a better way to work. Okay, good. I interviewed this founder for Founders Friday. It's a competitor.
Oh, okay.
So you're not familiar. That's okay. Get familiar with people who've tried this in the past.
Sure.
It's probably not obvious because I think even by the time I had interviewed him, he had turned more to an e-commerce model, realizing some of this concierge or service model.
Yep.
Got to some of what you're talking about in terms of like difficulty and challenge to scale. But they had started with a more service-oriented model. So it's branchfurniture.com. But we don't have to have a longer conversation about it, but just a note for you. Okay, so then my question becomes, this is pitch feedback, and then I'll come to like my broader story. Don't say the men thing even if you mean it. Most women make the purchasing choices, right, of furniture and generally in households.
Well, it depends. I mean, yes, if they're a couple, but people are staying single longer. I mean, there's a huge.
Do men buy, whether appropriate or not, for their life? Do they buy enough furniture like when they're solo?
Oh, absolutely, they do. And it's like I also look at the
either pair it with that sort of a stat,
yeah.
or maybe even you go towards the societal behavior. Even you saying people stay single longer, because when you left it alone, all my head did was I thought women make the purchasing choices, and everyone makes fun of men for not having bed frames, and like those are the two things that went off in my head.
Absolutely.
So adjust to that by like pairing that, because otherwise I go, that seems like a bad move. Until you give me more as to why you think that's interesting. And then I wouldn't say, because it's furniture and you could be for both, I actually wouldn't say it as we're targeting men. I'd say, maybe it doesn't even wind up in your 1 minute pitch and what I'm about to propose. In a longer conversation, you say, by the way, an interesting go-to-market we have that we think is underutilized in this space is targeting men in particular.
Yeah.
Because you might not, see these societal trends going on. And that way it's just a nice bonus versus getting me to go, huh? So just like, again, think about moving that over.
Agreed.
Now, question, this whole service model and, kind of doing this from a more do-it-for-you perspective, there's going to be a lot of, I assume, costs. You're going to reduce some of it, you're going to automate some of it, you're going to centralize some of it. But furniture, to my knowledge, and there have been furniture startups that have pitched on the feedback loop, is the only reason I know this stuff, the returns are super expensive for everybody involved, especially the companies involved when they happen. The shipping is just like unfixably expensive. The sort of like right order, wrong order until we get like AR to be perfect. But even today, like even just because you can stick your phone at a wall, it's still not great in terms of people wanting to switch out what they bought. I want to know about you just responding to what I just said generally, and then I want to encourage you to respond in ways that are furthering how your business model works, because I'm assuming some of your answer to me is we're not exposed to some of this because of who we work with on the actual furniture end, but you didn't get to that in your pitch. And I think in the case where an investor goes, this is going to cost a lot of money, the returns are going to be bad, quality control, it's actually a good thing to mention earlier more on how you partner with people who maybe eat that cost for you.
Yeah.
So go from,
certain facts, the returns on quality furniture is what we're doing are very low. It's like 2 to 3%.
Okay.
And what we do is our model was kind of sort of fast casual dining is what I modeled this after, of putting the onus, as much onus on the consumer and the customer as we can. So once, let's say they make an order, the delivery and setting that up and dealing with that is on them. We will facilitate a return if we have to, but it's very low on these big pieces of item. And we only offer foundational furniture, bigger pieces, which have even a lower return rate. So it's not like lighting and lamps where a lot of things go wrong. We wanted to keep it simple, where it says, I can figure out what to hang on the walls, but I can't figure out what sofa goes with a coffee table, things like that. The big purchase. I made a reference to, I call it, Stitch Fix meets Chipotle, because we have a limited selection and we work with a limited number of brands. So we want to build relationships with these kind of smaller brands so they trust us. And we've streamlined the process, so if any customer has a problem, we can go directly to the brand themselves, and they handle it very quickly. As far as shopping wise, with men purchasing furniture, I harken back to the Casper model, where people bought mattresses once every 10 years until Casper came around, and that whole movement with the mattresses, and it cut it down to 5 years. that people were buying mattresses on average because it made it so much easier to do. And that's what we're looking at when people see it's so easy to do. People are worried about the AOV because, how many sofas do you need? But you have a guest room, you have a bedroom. And if that process is very easy and smooth, that we think that people will buy more, for their guest room or their second home and such like that. And it's definitely not limited to men. I mean, it's, we're targeting it. It's not on the site at all. It's just kind of that undertone.
How far along are you?
We launched last year, but kind of, I call it a glorified MVP at this point. So we're up and running. And the problem was, you can't have a terrible website if you're selling, $8,000 worth of furniture. Yeah. So we've had to do that.
There are a lot of things that conflict, whether literally or at least just for someone who isn't building the thing, that I want to point out to you. You, for example, bring up Casper. There's a couple issues when we touched on this earlier. Like Casper, from a venture standpoint, has not done well, as an outcome. I get what you're saying in terms of its the mode shift in behavior of mattresses, but when you bring that up, you bring to me an example where I go, in a simpler product where they also then did things that it sounds like you're not doing, where they facilitated returns, they made it super cheap and easy. They were the ones also handling the brand, and so they got to more and further coddle the customer along the way. And so you brought up this example, and then you don't have some of the good stuff of how they did the bad job they did. Now, I'm sure there's some, I actually don't know if they didn't IPO, but did they exit at all?
I believe they. I could be off on this. I think they SPAC'd and the stock tanked, but I'm not sure.
So I'm sure some investors very early might have done okay. But so my point is that. So then my brain just went a lot of places. And I get why you mentioned all of those facts. So it's not like any particular thing wasn't a reaction or you trying to express something to me, but because they conflicted, they made me just stack buts as you went. Casper, but that wasn't great. And then also, but he's not even doing the thing that Casper got a lot of his go-to-market on, which is made returns risk-free and whatever for the customer. You're relying on these foundational pieces. When you mention foundational pieces, I go, okay, that's an answer. The 2 to 3% return stat is interesting. Oh, but that means he's selling less furniture because he's only selling foundational pieces. So all of your answers had buts. And both from a pitch perspective of how do you decide to frame some of these differently or tell a more cohesive story where these things don't conflict with each other, that's one thing. And then that's going to be a challenge even as a founder. I think this is probably stuff you're going to also be dealing with in these early stages. And so on that front, I say maybe some of the things you say to an investor who you're trying to get an early check from in this moment, you go, yeah, we don't know. Here are 3 hypotheses on returns or 3 hypotheses. And that way you're not giving me an answer I don't like. You're saying, oh, bet on my experiment. And a lot of pre-seed and seed investors who are true pre-seed and seed investors, they actually don't want the answer they don't believe in. They want the, I don't know, here are 3 things, what do you think? And so that might be your approach too.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. And I think even when this is a common theme that happened with all the pitches tonight. Actually, when I hear a pitch, a lot of times my job is, as someone who's giving pitch feedback, is not to come up with the poetic thing that they need to say to help them, get more money, but it's actually just telling them, hey, just say that. And so there were certain components, as an example, what I learned here, which I think is an important component here, is that because the return rate's so low, it's not as a capital intensive of a business as I would have first believed. And so to me, that is important to say, or else you will get bucketed in an investor's head into a business that you are not. And I think also by referencing certain analogies that kind of can be a little bit flimsy, or you're kind of like them, but you're kind of not. You catch the person on the kind of the wrong side of the analogy, then they're going to also bucket you in a way that you are not. And that's going to kind of take the conversation another place. And so there's a couple kind of components of what you'd mentioned that I think if you don't bring those up, then the investor will bucket you into a business that you are not. And then you're kind of starting the conversation on the defensive.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's, there's a lot of facets to it. And we were talking about, where this would go. And we have a pretty clear kind of growth plan. We have different verticals. I mean, principally the idea was to build the business and build trust in this sort of demographic, and then move on to toTree nursery for parents, or toTree Excel for athletes, and toTree U for university students.
If that's the case, by the way, so this is where like your storytelling should shift dramatically. If your point is there are certain categories of furniture and physicality and commerce where a concierge experience would provide a lot more comfort to a buyer who otherwise has to go through like a 3 to 6 month purchasing choice, doesn't know who to trust, doesn't know what brands to trust, might even be willing to spend a lot of capital against that desire, and it's getting more complicated as time passes. And this is our first category, and you talk more about like the buying tension in these areas, and you talk less about like foundational furniture for men. Like I think the thing you're doing, and a lot of early stage founders do, sometimes there's actually like a theme thing they're doing, but they have their first iteration and they're too anchored on, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing right now, versus let me tell you stories of commerce tension that I think are happening today. And this is like where I'm starting. Because that, when you said nursery, I was like, oh, that must be so. There must be people who have the capital to build a nursery when they're becoming parents, but don't have the time or the energy. And so I go, interesting. And then you said something, I think said the school right at athletes.
Well, toTree athletes and university students and right after
Is it all
college.
the same concept? There's like time and there's capital, but there's no time or energy. Is that kind of like?
Yeah. Yes. And the lack of knowledge as well, too.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think it also kind of furthering that point, or else it sounds like disparate communities. They're kind of just like trying to dip your toes into, and it doesn't feel as cohesive. And so to the extent to which you can kind of talk about having identified a certain type of persona where they don't have a lot of time, where, we're starting with men because of X, Y, and Z reasons. I think that also brings together what might seem like random, like groups of people that aren't actually as random.
Yeah, you have theories behind them. For the sake of time, we have to move, but thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
it. Yeah, thank you.
For the sake of time, shall we hear the last founder?
Yeah,
I think it's the
let's
last
do it.
one.
Yeah.
Awesome. With a round of applause, founder number 5. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
What's your name?
Marisa,
Marisa, you're going to have a minute to pitch. Tell us what you're building, get some feedback. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What are you building?
So my name is Marisa. I'm the founder of Joba Network. Joba Network is a freelancer marketplace to build verified credibility. Marketplaces today like Upwork or Fiverr are really a race to the bottom for freelancers, and it's filled with agencies, really high fees. So what we are offering is a user-owned network that allows people to come on to build their identity, make it owned on a blockchain wallet, build on credentials, and then our long-term vision is really to build almost like a credibility score that people can use their freelancer reputation on our platform to get loans, be able to apply for visas and work visas, and basically build this borderless reputation.
Under a minute.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I guess to start, maybe the obvious question: why blockchain? Why is that the right path?
Yeah, we get asked this question a lot, of course. The main use case for blockchain is because we want the platform to be really privacy focused, and platforms like LinkedIn can easily shut down your account, or these Upwork Fiverrs also hold funds, lock people's accounts all the time. So by having it on the blockchain, you can actually own your account, and the wallet is your ID really into any marketplace.
Is there a type of freelancer that's more like blockchain forward or more crypto forward that'd be more likely to engage with like something a little bit new? Or like how'd you think about that, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time in the crypto Web3 space, but definitely a lot of designers, community managers, marketers, any kind of web developer really is pretty open to using this. And especially talents in emerging markets, they really want to earn in stable coins or earn dollars. So they really see this as a speedy solution that's fast and, much more low cost. Yeah.
Have you come to the feedback loop before?
No, first time.
Have you watched it before?
No.
Do you know anything about me other than that I'm here right now?
I looked at your bio, and that was about it. I also looked at his bio. Yeah.
The reason I asked that question is I'm probably the most anti-Web3 person on the planet.
I heard about this.
Someone warned you.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean we've a lot of Web3 pitches, and I'm actually going to give you feedback that I give to a lot of the Web3 pitches nowadays that I think will be mostly supportive.
Yeah.
And then I have unsupportive questions that are still supportive of you as a founder, but about the business. And I'm in the talent space. So you have a lot of converging, interesting factors.
Yes.
The thing that is the overall feedback for a Web3 company is the answers to the question were both unsatisfying and I think could be more satisfying. The reason they're unsatisfying is the stuff that you said to someone who's skeptical. And by the way, you can just go get Web3 investors and that can be the way you live, for sure. But if you want to be more broad-based appealing, a centralized institution like LinkedIn doesn't just take down accounts for no reason. Now, we can have a political debate about this, but then we'd have to be like David Sachs fighting with Sam Altman, fighting with Obama, Biden, and Trump. That's the conversation you have to convince me LinkedIn takes down accounts, because it doesn't do it unless they think they have a reason.
Yeah.
So you then have to have a philosophical debate with me as to whether we think institutions like LinkedIn should ever have a reason, and then we're in a free speech argument.
Yeah.
So let's avoid that one.
I have another argument for why blockchain, I guess.
But just so,
personal experience,
I'm excited to hear it. But so that's why that one doesn't work, is because I'd have to believe what you believe about the world, and I don't. I like centralization. I like an army backing my money. I think sanctions should work, and so I like bordered currencies. So that's my thing there, but I'll point out, and maybe your example or your other element here will do this. There's a founder who pitched very early on here who then went on to YC, and I presume is, from my outside signals, I haven't caught up with him in a while. Fime of Blaze, it's like the 9th time I've mentioned him in future episodes. He probably doesn't realize. It's a Venmo, but using USDC. So the whole idea, and he pitched on stage, was people are digital nomads as they're going about their day. We're just going to we're barely going to mention, we're like an underbelly stablecoin or USDC, and you can transact internationally. And his de-emphasis of this, first of all, as part of his pitch, and then the way he told that story allowed me to go, I don't know that I agree that Web3 and blockchain and crypto and stablecoins are all good ideas. But they're here. And by the way, that was pre-election that he did that pitch. So they're even more here now that our incoming administration is very pro this stuff. And so if they do, and if no regulators shut him down for enabling what I think shouldn't exist, which is very for foreign payments, okay, yeah, I could imagine there's like a 50% chance he'll stay legal. And I agree with the want. Therefore, it's a good idea. I think you probably have similar dynamics that we'll get to now. But that's my overall feedback: is use Web3 justifications in conversation that don't put the other person on like a wait, hold on, but right. I think they're again, because I know talent, I'm imagining some of the other stuff, and I'm curious to hear about it. That you could say instead. So what's your something that's coming to mind?
Some of my other personal experience was actually being part of a exchange that got hacked via social engineering and using LinkedIn job scams. So $120 million was basically hacked with an identity being compromised myself. So this experience as well, and many crypto companies are actually experiencing a lot of North Korean remote workers, a lot of North Koreans that are posing as, North Americans or UK people. So this also kind of was the reason why you need to make this more private.
So I mean, it still doesn't hit for me because I these stories to me are about the world is tough.
Yeah.
That's what that rounds to.
Yeah.
And that might sound insensitive, but that's what it rounds to.
Yeah.
Versus, and maybe this is, again, I have I built product at TopTal, which is a freelancer marketplace, makes more revenue than Upwork, or at least while I was there. It doesn't do as many transactions. So significant company in this space. I know these companies while I use them. And again, I'm in the, kind of career concierge space. Yeah. So for example, the cross-border payment thing, when I hire freelancers, we either go through Upwork because they enable the transaction, therefore we're all paying a 20% VIG or 15% VIG, or we tell them, send me a payable invoice with credit card and we're going to split the fees. And that's the only way we'll work with an international freelancer. And we go, we can't work with you. So it cuts off the conversation. That's one dynamic, is enabling a think about it. Stablecoin payments. That's one element. The second element is this whole idea of like the verification. I don't believe in this element as much because I don't know, and not that I don't believe it. I need to understand more about it. Like, what does verification truly mean of skills, and where do you? Because there have been startups in the space in the original Web3, kind of thing that did like, oh, we're going to put your skills on the chain. And I still don't quite grasp it. I could imagine. When you pair some of these things together, the ability to maybe do more matching based on like on-chain things could be interesting. I still think a central institution could do it. But again, that story I would object to less. So these I like better. Because they're less institutional about like Web3.
And to the extent to which you're choosing freelancers who are in countries that
in emerging markets.
Emerging markets, and they're every day their unit of currency is worth less than it was the day before. Like there are, I know, I mean, I think on the Web3 front, not to have a philosophical debate, I think stablecoins are clearly a real use case of crypto. And so I think that like there is something there. On the verification piece, I think it's one of those ideas on that front to me where if you snapped your fingers and everyone was on the blockchain, then I 100% agree. But getting there, I just don't know if I have. And I've worked with freelancers myself. I built like a smaller version basically of toTree on a non-venture backed basis. And none of them, like I was working with American freelancers, none of them were really, that wasn't like what they were chomping at the bit for, at least in my experience. But I do think there are a subsegment of freelancers who, the wedge of sorts is focusing on this kind of stable coin payment infrastructure. And while you're doing so, they can build credibility. But I wonder if that's the
I think
secondary piece.
Yeah, the secondary piece for also those guys in the emerging markets, we've talked to a lot of them. A lot of them are really prohibited by being stuck under an agency that's then taking like 30-40% of their wages, right? So we're trying to bring them also out of the agency and have kind of
How
the
will
reputation.
you do that though?
By allowing them to have kind of more social attestations, credentials.
So again, this is like, this is tough. Like in your case, you're not doing this. I give this feedback to a lot of founders. You're violating whatever rule I'm about to say the least, but you're still violating it, where like you're saying a thing that's objectionable. I don't have a solution for the thing you're talking about, but I think agencies will always, middle people who have control, especially in emerging markets, will always find their way to exert that control. For example, they will literally be on top of that person physically, and therefore, your technology can't save them. So I don't disagree that you might help on the margins, but I don't know if that should be an anchor story for you. Because then I go like, again, I object to that being, because what it does is it distracts me from other core value propositions. So it's not that I'm saying tell no stories. I'm saying tell certain stories and don't tell others that are kind of asides, because you don't want me to fight you on those when I could be interested in these. And again, me on the Web3 stuff aside, a lot of people will have some of these opinions. Don't trigger the accidental traps, which is the optional stuff, until you either are way further in conversation or you know that they want to talk about it. The other element, Leeor's been giving a lot of founders advice tonight that I love around what's the wave that you're riding. We've had a weird conversation around H-1Bs in this country. AI is coming, cheapening the cost of intelligence. What employees look like, I think nobody knows, even Sam. There's a bunch of dynamics here. And so you telling a story is, as that changes, the one thing we're certain about is emerging markets and talent from emerging markets are going to be matched with capital and employers in Western markets, or what do you call a not emerging market? Developed market? Developed market is probably the right way to say that. And that's the tidal wave that you are going to enable more of in this more seamless, transactional, again, stablecoin-oriented way, because that is a huge, inevitable. No one except people who are delusional about AI can disagree with this. And again, there's an immigration backdrop to this that I think makes it interesting. And so if you go, hey, not as many people in this country are going to be employed. And it's going to be similar in a lot of developed countries where there's capital and the desire for productivity. And people are already offshoring a lot of that desire. And we are part of, kind of that overall.
And I think we're also trying to lay the infrastructure for the 51% of Americans that are going to be freelance by 2027. Today, if you're a 1099er, it's really difficult for you to get a, just get a rental, right? It's very difficult for you to get a car loan, right? So I think there needs to be more infrastructure and verified data.
You're doing the thing again. I agree with you. I don't know if you're going to be able to solve it. So you're mentioning an interesting fact, but it's distracting me from your value propositions. Now that's, we can have a good conversation about that. And I agree with you on like what's going to happen to people, but I don't know that you're well suited and you might be, and you might have future product plans that come into play. But currently your value proposition to me, and Leeor, I'm curious if like you agree, like it's centered at least so far on, okay, what if you took top talent Upwork and stablecoined it? That's like mostly how I round it. And, again, that's not going to be a fit for someone like me, but it might be a fit for someone like you. And when you mention these other things, I go, well, this is a different thing entirely. And I don't want you to distract somebody who might like it from the core.
And I think we also want to use those credentials and matching and have like the agents go and actually scrape across different job boards, present the opportunities aggregated for the users, instead of having to, go through the search and go through all these sites. So if you have this identity here, then we actually know exactly who you are, what your credentials are.
That's interesting, by the way, because that's just like a user experience problem with the current platforms, like an Upwork and a top talent, all these things. It's like very manual and very like category based and very like exact phrase match based. So I like that, even just like abstracted from the it's on chain part. And again, think about when you can do that for certain people you're talking to, where it's like, forget that it's on chain. It's just the user experience and the AI matching on these platforms, and they're never going to catch up because any incumbent is too distracted by protecting the revenue.
I think one thing that would be helpful for me also is this is also a question, is to understand like the one person on both sides of the marketplace, so to speak, that you're solving their problems. And so if you're solving the problem of the person, in, I don't know, like in pick a country that has, inflating currency.
Yeah, Nigeria, for example.
Whatever. So but pick someone in Nigeria, they're a freelancer.
Yes.
And then they're working, and there's a certain specific kind of task that might not be serviced appropriately by Upwork because of like credentialing issues. And then that's why, X user is searching for, someone who has the proper credentialing at a price that kind of makes sense for both parties.
Yeah.
I think that like specificity here, like also will help crystallize something that might otherwise seem like more amorphous.
Yeah. I would say that the Nigerian working for a UK company, that's, maybe anywhere up to 30 employees that wants to outsource some of their development, doesn't want someone directly that's in the same time zone. For Japanese companies, we also have declining working population. So they're also hiring a lot of Vietnamese developers that are young. So those are like the two kind of direct markets where
again, you have these like thematic stories, rely on them, I think. And again, that'll allow you, depending on your audience, to also avoid some of the things that they might fight you over. And then also, I think they're just so powerful. When you're mentioning, for example, just, a declining population in Japan, again, it's like not just happening here. There's a lot of factors that are changing the world of work. So go to those themes. You uniquely are going to not need to live in UX because everyone can imagine what a talent marketplace feels like.
Yeah.
I mean, you can mention when it's a benefit.
The UX,
but I think a lot of the stuff that is high level interesting about what you do is thematic.
Yeah, and I think like it's easier for someone to argue with you until they hear the UK Nigerian point, because like that's not something that they're necessarily privy to. Now eventually they'll go explore and kind of confirm whether or not that's true.
Yeah.
But I think that even that specific example helps to crystallize, all right, these are not, I'm not like thinking about the person who's like freelancing across the street from me. Maybe eventually you get there, but at least where the most burning desire is that kind of type of situation where maybe I'm not going to use my biases or whatnot to assume that like, oh, that's not going to work for my friend down the street who freelance does marketing work.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Leeor, we just had 6 pitches. We like to do 2 things at the end here.
Yeah.
We like to talk through takeaways. The ability for somebody to talk about an industry that's changing, if they're in that industry, is so key.
Yeah.
And so talking about media, one of the things we didn't get to with him is the other thing about that industry is, could it be completely deprecated soon? And I don't think that he needs to have the answer, but he needs to say whether Greenlit, what it looks like in the case where generative AI displaces most of the current process and talent, and what it looks like when it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't mean he doesn't need to predict, but he needs to forecast.
Yeah.
And so being able to talk, if you're in any industry that's changing that way, I once asked someone who's building a coaching platform, do you think employees will exist in 5 years because she's doing something for junior employees? And her first answer was like, yes, of course, they're going to be the ones building it. I was like, no, I get it. Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
But like, I'm talking in a world that changes that dramatically over some time horizon, how does your product change? Or are you dead? And no founder should be like, I'll die in that world, but you should have some answer. So that's one of my takeaways. And again, it goes to what I think your takeaway will be, and I don't want to steal it, so I want to give it to you, is like this thematic thing. And so like, being able to talk through, you like identified for so many people and you teased out like, hey, what's the tailwind? What's the thing that you are, the wave that you're riding? And I think one of the fundamental things is hard for a founder who thinks like, I need to convince you on fundamentals. I need to like, give you a surface area of potential product features.
Pre-seed, that's always, not always, but many times is a losing battle.
Yeah, so that's mine. And again, I think it came off of, the conversations we were having.
Yeah. I think, the themes that emerge, I think the inflections piece is so important. And it's something that, is just the way that I was taught. And then also the way that, I've had, some kind of good investments here and there. And so when things don't fit that framework, it's not that they can't exist and you can't create large companies around them, but the burden of proof is that much higher. And so it takes net more signs around the business that kind of make you believe that there's actually something working here. Like a lot of times, like I love investing in marketplaces, but in certain cases where the marketplace is like not something that's built, it's in an industry that's mature, there's no particular inflection. Like the burden for me is higher because, inevitably, like there's the question in my head as to why is this example going to break free when I've seen 5 other ones that have it.
The threshold for the people in that industry changing their behavior are high,
totally,
because things are fine.
Absolutely. And so then you wonder as to what are things that can be teased out, and sometimes it requires data if it's an industry that you have spent some time in and maybe the burden of proof is a bit higher. I think additionally, a lot of pitches like look, fundamentally, there's going to be people who are going to agree with what you're building. There's going to be people who are not. But I think there's a lot of pitches on the margin, like that actually have an opportunity to succeed, but you need to find, it's a combination of finding people in your network who, will listen to what you're saying. It's also people who don't know what you're building and who you ask them to articulate back to you what are the things that, are their takeaways. And it's, of course, like adapting even through investor pitches as you eventually have them, like don't have the same pitch, if especially if it's not working from when you start pitching, for the first week and into the third week. If you have the same pitch and things haven't moved and you're not going to partner meetings, you're not people aren't asking you for diligence items, if you're doing the same thing over and over again, it's insanity. And so it's trying to figure out what are those cues where people are resonating in the pitch and what are those cues where people are getting lost.
Leeor, this has been fantastic.
Yeah,
thank you so much
really
for sharing the insight for all these startup founders up here. Good job.
Yeah, thank you.
A shout out to all the brave founders who got up on stage. This is not easy, especially with the lights and cameras. Good job.
Yeah, thank you.
Shout out to the team of the Feedback Loop. Appreciate you all.
Thank you.
Again, if you're not subscribed already on YouTube, we're also a podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, which has podcasts for some reason. Super, super excited about this year, 2025's version of the Feedback Loop. If you're a startup founder, that seat is not as scary as it seems from afar. So when you get the email about the next event and there's the apply link, whether you are going for the next event or the few events afterwards, submit the form, get brave, get on this stage, get your idea out there, get the feedback, because you're increasing your probability of a good outcome by getting this sort of conversation going and your story out into the world a little bit. Don't worry, it's not going to be the only or the main way people hear about you too. We're a small show. It's not yet Shark Tank. So still, it's that safe space where you can make a lot of progress and in a friendly environment. Other than that, everyone have a great rest of your Tuesday. Thank you very much.